Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 12. This is Shannon Adcock with Awake Illinois Livestream. We are on episode 12 right now of Protect the Kids, and we have some special guests that I'll be bringing on to this platform shortly. I'm so grateful that Natalya and Maya are with us. And actually, I'm just now noticing, Natalya, I have your picture on there, but not your name. So that's fantastic. I'll make sure it gets added before we finish this. But I just want to say thank you to everyone who is joining across our platforms. We are on Facebook, we are on YouTube, and we are on X, Twitter. The Instagram has not loaded, so I think we had a stream key issue, so apologies for that. But the recording will be posted to our website and, of course, the blog and everywhere else. You will have no problems finding this. So I just want to go through a couple really quick housekeeping Illinois updates. So let me get this on this platform for you. So all of our recorded live streams are available for you to click through at awakeil.com/fight is probably the best hub for you to take a look at all of our previous phenomenal guests that have been talking and bringing their various perspectives on how and why we have to protect children from gender ideology, from the culture noise that is just really, it's just deafening right now. So a lot of different perspectives, parents, advocates, medical professionals, again, all walks of life that have come together for these kids. So check out previous episodes at our website. So we have a couple different updates right now on these issues. What I want to go through are the opt-out forms. We're going to talk a little bit about that too in today's episode with Natalya and Maya, and then also Title IX victories that we've had in the state, sex ed updates, and then local elections. So real quickly, I'm just going to fly through this, and then we're going to have a great conversation with these two amazing guests. So the opt-out forms at awakeil.com/forms. These are the 3 forms that we have put forth for parents to download in one click in triplicate to get on file the fact that you as guardians and parents know your parental rights and that you are absolutely not permitting secret conversations with your minor child on any number of issues, whether it is comprehensive sexual education, sexuality, prescription drugs, mental health, whatever it may be. Please check out these forms and have them added to your student's file. And we'll kind of delve more into that, I expect, in today's conversation. We have the Moms for Liberty Title IX lawsuit that we have been shedding light on. Moms for Liberty and the YAF organization and Southeastern Legal Foundation have done an unprecedented lawsuit against the radical Title IX amendments. And so this is something that a lot of advocates here in Illinois, they have joined Moms for Liberty as either a national member or a chapter member, and I'm proud to be a chapter chair of the DuPage chapter. And so there's been a lot of moving parts, very, very quick moving parts to this federal lawsuit, but we are seeing that school districts across the state are tabling any adoption of these amendments. And so if you go to momsforliberty.org/Title IX lawsuit, check out this webpage. It gives you all the information you need. And you can see right here in this, this graphic, Oregon Illinois School District has put in their most recent school board minutes this week that they are tabling doing any amendments to Title IX in their school district. So well done to everyone who has been informing their schools that there is indeed an off-ramp regarding adoption of these amendments. They cannot be forced to make any changes to Title IX. And I did post to my X account, my personal account, asking why the Illinois Association of School Boards put in their August newsletter a whole big synopsis on Title IX, but failed to mention this federal lawsuit with Moms for Liberty and YAF. So I think that there's an opportunity for them to do better on informing school districts across the state who are being informed basically by their citizens and by parents as to the implications of this lawsuit. So check out that Moms for Liberty website and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. The sex ed analysis that we posted last year at this time, so when Illinois adopted the comprehensive sexual education law stating that school districts K through 12 that adopt comprehensive sexual education, they will have to teach the national sex ed standards. We have done for years now an empowerment campaign on how these radical lessons are in kindergarten through 12 classrooms in Illinois. And so when this Illinois State Board of Education memo is published each summer, we do an analysis. And we started this last year. We're going to do it again this year. And what we do is we put forth an Excel sheet so that you can easily toggle and see your school district and see what resources and curriculum materials they have posted and reported that they use in the classroom. So this is really important for parents to take a look at and to know exactly why we put forth the opt-out forms to protect your children from conversations or curricula that may violate your parental rights and or family values. So this will be coming in September for the 2024-2025 analysis. We'll be posting that. And lastly, the consolidated election packets are going around now with candidates that are going to be filing to run for local office. And this includes school boards. So a lot of you are going to have an opportunity to hear who these people are, what their values are, and you should be asking them what their stance is on gender ideology, on sex ed, on Title IX, and if they're running for city council, what are their thoughts on immigration? So many issues right now are affecting our families and our communities. So as these petitions circulate, do ask the tough questions and save the date, because April 1st, 2025 is when you will have the opportunity to elect new school board members, city council people, or retain the ones who represent your values. So that is a lot, but I want to now get started on a really urgent conversation as we have put forth. We have this whole issue right now with parents trying to figure out what is happening with this issue of gender ideology. Why do they need to educate themselves? Most recently with the Olympics, a lot of people are talking about, there was a alleged and perceived biological male boxer who got into the ring with a female boxer, and this got a huge conversation going. And yet many of us, Natalya and Maia, who I'm going to bring on here, and many other national advocates have been really trying to focus on where this ideology comes from and how it is not just in the Olympics or among adults, but it actually is happening in our culture. And it is an issue right now that parents are seeing as affecting young generations as early as kindergarten, if not sooner. So it is my pleasure to welcome here, I'm going to get them added here to this platform, Natalya Murakhver and Maia Poet. So Natalya is with Restore Childhood. She is a fierce mom in New York City, and Maia Poet is a returning guest. First time we've had somebody return after one episode. So thank you, Maia. Maia is a fierce detransitioner advocate, and she's been speaking truth. And both of these women, I'm just so grateful that you're here to talk to everybody. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. I had a lot of fun with you last time, so I imagine this will be no different.
Absolutely. So I'm going to just take off my slide here and just let us get a little bit more acquainted with one another. I've been so humbled to hear your voices in this conversation. And so let's start with you, Natalya. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and what brings you to talk to us about this important issue today? And you're going to share with us a resource as we go through this, but just give your anyone listening a bit about yourself. Tell us.
Sure. Everybody loves to talk about themselves, and I am no different. I love to talk about myself. I was 6 when I came here to this country from the Soviet Union. I settled in Brooklyn with my parents. I'm an only child. School was absolutely essential for me. I learned English in school. I made friends. I became an American. I became a citizen. I became an adult. And it was shocking when America closed its schools to children back in 2020. I'm looking back now. I can't believe it's been 4 years. And your organization is called Awake Illinois. Well, I am Awake New York City. I woke up and started questioning everything about what our children were being taught, who was making the decisions, what role parents were playing, and what role parents should be playing in schools and in our children's well-being. And that's when I started advocating for kids to go back to school. I organized the only lawsuit in New York City to reopen our schools and end the practice of Zoom in a room in classrooms here in New York, which was going on well into 2021. Our middle and high schools, when the elementary schools reopened, the middle and high schools did not. Kids would still go back to school, and they would be masked, and they'd be sitting in front of screens, while union contracted teachers would be in other classrooms, keeping away from them, or at home, zooming in their pajamas. So,
Right.
the discrepancy there was was insane. And especially for a Democrat like me, who was traditionally inclined to support unions, it was a great awakening moment. So I started an organization called Restore Childhood. We are in our 3rd year, and I'm here to talk about the Gender Toolkit, which I think is going to be invaluable to parents just going back to school with their kids.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Natalya, for your advocacy. I know it's not easy in this time, particularly in areas that have had a lot of unfortunate power brokers that have tried to limit the rights of parents and have restricted so many opportunities for children in this young generation. So thank you for what you are doing, and we're excited to talk more about the resources that you're putting forth for everyone. And Maya, welcome back. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me back. So I just turned 25, and so I guess I'm now in the club of cognitively mature adults, I suppose, allegedly.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So I was trans for half of my life, from 12 to 24. And I really woke up to the facts that, there are a lot of dangers that come along with medicalization and with basically trying to fight biology, really through the process of living through multiple wars. And because I was in this for so long and I got into it so early, I've really seen this entire movement evolve and become more and more illiberal over time. And I think that, there are a lot of ideas in addition to the ideas around gender ideology that are being peddled to schools, to children in schools, which I find to be just incredibly illiberal and really a lot of dangerous ideas. Dangerous in terms of basically causing division unnecessarily and chipping away at social cohesion that the United States had worked so hard to achieve, like in regards to racial cohesion. And I just think that, there are a lot of, along with all of these woke ideologies, a lot of these children are being taught ideas which, as far as from a developmental perspective, I think really stunt them in rigid thinking, in black and white rigid thinking, which is developmentally appropriate for kids. But the goal of a school should be to nurture a child's abstract thinking skills and to teach a child how not to fall into tribes, as is the human instincts. Like, the goal of schools should be to elevate children and to sort of enhance their development. And so whether we're talking about, today we're going to be talking about gender ideology, but we have to remember also that these really false and dangerous beliefs about sex and gender come alongside other false beliefs that are, I would argue, equally dangerous. And so today we're going to tackle one of them. And I really appreciate the toolkit from Restore Childhood. I read it, and I think it's an invaluable resource because in my mind, it's a resource which breaks down, all of the different sort of individual heads of the hydra that is gender ideology, because you have the medical component, you have the males in women's sports. And like, whenever you have an ideology that makes false metaphysical claims and then you try to enforce this ideology, whether, biologically, chemically, or socially, there are going to be a lot of consequences. And so I think for parents, it can be kind of confusing because they'll see headlines about, detransitioners or about the men in women's sports. And there are so many issues that go along with this. And so I think the toolkit really breaks down all of these different issues in a very salient and easy way for parents to understand, so that after reading the toolkit, they can become, somewhat of citizen experts in this issue. So I'm very glad to speak with you both today about this.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And, I do sense that the tide is turning, and I want to open with some hope and optimism, because the truth was inevitably going to become fashionable. It's just been a matter of time and patience. And I know that a lot of people who have been trying to speak truth to this and will continue to are going to be doxxed and harassed and called names and gaslit, but that's not stopping us. And you are two fierce warriors joined by many who ran up on the hill to protect children. So we're going to delve into this. Natalya, do you want me to pull up the toolkit now, or do you want to delve into anything before we start showing this?
Oh, you can pull it up. That's great.
Okay.
It's
All
very
right.
visual. I mean, we had worked on another toolkit before this one in 2022 called Urgency of Normal. And that was about getting kids back to normal in schools with regard to mandates, vaccine and mask mandates. So this is kind of like the next iteration. And whereas that one was really just kind of a PowerPoint, slide, this is really visual, and it's meant to be engaging and even something you can share with your older children and use as a discussion tool.
Very good. And I think you bring up a great point, which is all of this is connected, and kind of, Maya, what you were talking about, the school closures and the power brokers and the cabal, more or less, that has been pushing so much of this harm. It's tied into the school closures. It's tied into teacher unions and non-government organizations and top-down government policy. Same with the masking. Our organization, Awake Illinois, was very intentional on that fight. I personally had my children's names on a lawsuit against Pritzker, our governor, worst governor in history, along with the State Board of Education, Department of Public Health, and hundreds and hundreds of school districts. That's what it came down to. And I do think litigation is going to be an important angle to this. But meanwhile, we have to speak truth, just as we did, in what seems like another life when we were fighting all of that stuff to, as you say, restore childhood and restore normal. So this is another component of that, is this beautiful toolkit that you have done. So you can find it at gendertoolkit.com. And I'm going to actually pull up right now another tab to get this going. And so why don't you walk us through this? Because I think that, again, these tools are so important. It's a beautifully done graphic. Let's go through this page by page here. Let me see if I can get rid of the sidebar. All right. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's start with this cover here. So an informational and advocacy toolkit for parents, student, mentors, teachers, and administrators. I think that's the key point, isn't it, Natalya, that this isn't just for parents. This is for anyone entrusted with children.
Yeah, and actually, I've been speaking to some pediatricians who are deeply concerned about their fellow doctors who are interacting with children and with families who don't have access or don't have the time. Pediatricians are very, very busy. They're often, a little bit behind the curve on the most recent research. And it would be great to get this toolkit to them as well. So that's something we're troubleshooting right now. Basically, anyone who interacts and makes decisions and gives advice about children, because it is very, very easy to fall into like this morality trap. Like nobody wants to be called a transphobe. Nobody. And the point here is that it's not about phobia. It's about using the current research to understand what is best for children right now, and about not rushing to any sort of irreversible damage, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. We're like, a time to wait, like it's a time to think, a time to explore, all of the different things that are in front of us, rather than rushing to do things that no child could ever provide informed consent for.
That's right. And so we saw this too with the school closures and the masking. Policymakers may have thought they were doing the right thing, but they got bad advice from attorneys who were bought off, from special interest groups who were bought off, just bad information and pressure from the wrong people. But when parents got involved in the conversation and actually empowered them with the correct data and resources, that's when things started to pivot. And look at what we've learned. And you made a great point at the GenSpect event that we were at here in Chicago for Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria Awareness Day, where you said, if you don't empower policymakers or physicians with the truth, who will do it instead, right? It could be big pharma. It could be any number of special interest groups or organizations that have been compromised. So this is where parents can take the lead, and this is going to be a great resource. Okay, so let's delve into this.
So one of the advisors on the toolkit, who's still very much involved with our organization and making sure that, we're steering on the side of science and evidence, we're always following the science, is Dr. Christopher Kalibi, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist at the University of Southern Florida. And we asked him for a quote for this toolkit, and this is what he said. He said, "Schools should not socially transition kids, as it doesn't have clear benefits and seems to support the unsubstantiated theory that social transition is good for mental health. It also seems to encourage consideration of a medical pathway." I think that gives a lot of gravitas to these very kind of flyaway, very light seeming, pronouns or other mitigations that schools undertaking. Well, it's just a pronoun. We just asked them for a pronoun. We just said AFAB and AMAB in sex education instead of girl and boy. These are all gateway drugs. And
Yes.
I think what Dr. Kalibi is saying is beware. These are not interventions that have no costs. They may have actually quite a dire cost that you may not be willing to pay.
Absolutely. And that's great of Dr. Christopher. Props to all of the clinicians who are taking a strong stand now, right? When they know that they could be ostracized or they could be looked down upon by their peers, they are feeling called to speak truth to this. So that's an excellent quote, and that's phenomenal. So contents, what are we going to be talking about here?
So it's really, this is all about practical tools. It's about getting parents conversant on the terms and the theories that are being espoused in schools, right? You don't want a parent to go in and try to have a conversation about gender ideology with a school administrator or a teacher or a superintendent and not really be up on what the terms they're talking about really mean. Otherwise, they are going to be perceived as a transphobe, and they are going to feel kind of like adversarial because of all the things they don't know. So this is basically when I was growing up, we had Cliff Notes, right? Did you either of you ever use Cliff Notes?
They saved me. They saved me in school.
Right, me too. Shakespeare in particular. I'm sorry, I'm ashamed to admit, but like we needed the Cliff Notes. So this is kind of your Cliff Notes to what's happening. It's gender ideology 101 in schools. And we try to go through, the costs of each intervention, like what the pathway looks like. We have some really great infographics, like on the school to clinic pipeline, to just kind of give parents a sense of the direction they may be heading in if they don't assert their authority, their ultimate authority, right? Because we've been, over the last few years during COVID, it's always trust the experts, but you're not an expert. Even now, talking to people about failed COVID policies, are you an expert? What are the initials after your name? It's like none. But ultimately, parents are the experts. So it's important and incumbent upon experts to be conversant in these things. So, we talk about the different advocacy groups that have written the gender guidelines for schools and also for the CDC. They seem innocuous. They have wonderful names. The ACLU has historically been on the right side of things, not anymore. GLSEN, the gay and lesbian, organization that I think has taken on a lot of this transgender fight with regard to gender ideology in children and gender affirming care. These organizations, and I think Maya can probably talk about them in even greater detail, may have been on the right side of things up until like 2014, maybe even 2016. But once gay marriage became approved and they had excess slush funds to spend on something else, this seems to have been their next project.
Absolutely. Maya, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems that, so we have a bunch of different like legacy civil rights organizations, whether it be the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, which I know has named you as like a hate group or something like that, which is a massive achievement. So you have groups like that, and then you have, like GLAAD and ACLU and the Trevor Project and GLSEN, all of these organizations which, when they were created, had a very important civil rights fight to achieve. And, for the SPLC, it was racial justice. And for all these other organizations, it was like gay rights and gay marriage. And, organizations sort of, they want to ensure their own continuance. And so the problem with these types of organizations is really that they were actually so good at their job that they, fought the battle, they won the fight. But then all of the people who were working for those organizations didn't want to be laid off because, And so the organization, therefore didn't want to dissolve, which is actually very common for organizations. And so these organizations had a lot of infrastructure. They had a lot of public trust, because especially with these gay rights organizations, they had the buy-in of the gay community, because these organizations served a really important purpose. But once they had achieved gay rights, and they had all of these kind of successful civil rights arguments and all of this organizational infrastructure, what they ended up doing was basically pivoting to the trans issue, because they were very vulnerable to, any rich funders that were willing to give them money. And so there have been recently articles published about, I believe it's GLAAD, and the kind of lavish, excessive spending of those organizations. So, and you can
tons of money, crazy money, Maya, crazy money. I don't even think people understand the amount of money that is funding these programs. It is not hyperbole. Right. It's billions of dollars in this industry when you combine all the different sectors. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh no, you're fine. The amounts of money that these organizations get is pretty ridiculous. And I think something that's really important to note is if you look at the SPLC, right? They used to track the Klan and take the Klan on in court. But then, if you look on their website and you see they break down their accomplishments and achievements by decade. And from 1980 to 2000, they had 17 what they would call landmark cases. From 2000 until today, they've only had 3. So they're a law center. They used to do a lot of litigation to victims of, for victims of racism, and for, just civil rights causes in general. But you see around the 90s that they start to focus less and less primarily on racial justice, and start to add in, anti-bullying programs in schools. And they added a bunch of other programs, and they started to pivot. So in the 90s and 2000s, they started tacking on a bunch of different issues. So they no longer became a one issue organization. And furthermore, they had this database called the Klan Watch, where they would track the Klan. And that has been renamed to Hate Watch. And who do they define as a hate group? Well, basically just their political opponents. I mean, they're unwilling to call, Antifa a hate group. In fact, they've even published an article about why that's problematic to call them a hate group. And now they're just going after, groups of concerned parents who are their political opponents. And so it's ridiculous.
But it makes sense.
For the record, it does make sense. Well, it's meant to intimidate. That's all it is. It's basically the bully in the schoolyard hiding behind a non-government organization that's funded. So, that's why I love to say, we can't be canceled. And we celebrate it. Our video that's pinned at our Twitter, it's mocking the fact that they thought they could try and intimidate us. So we celebrate that we've been added to the list, because to your point, Maya, Southern Poverty Law Center, and even the random troll on Twitter that's talking about how I look, or how you look, Natalya, or how you look, Maya, we're literally you guys, you're just stop, because it's not going to intimidate us, right? Whether you're a troll on Twitter or Southern Poverty Law Center, this truth is going to emerge and be fashionable, and they're all going to look stupid. And we all know who's on the side of children's innocence. But yes, I'm glad that you mentioned SPLC, and we love that they named us. We're appreciative. Our members loved it. They're like, all right, you guys keep going. This is a badge of honor now, because at the end of the day, they can't come for all of us. So keep trying.
Right. It means you've shaken the tree enough that, they feel you're a threat. It is concern, just to play devil's advocate, it is, living in a very blue area. It does tend to shut down conversation when organizations like Moms for Liberty, which, as you know, I support and have been friends with the founders from the beginning, when you try to bring up valid points that they make, which are many and vast, and the conversation is immediately shut down by people who really only read the headlines or just the New York Times or the Washington Post. They say, oh, they're a hate group by SPLC. And it takes it's very quick, calling somebody a name is a quick, one thing, it's an acute thing. It's quick, but trying to break it down and get people to listen again, that is something that you need to work on, and that takes a lot of
Yes,
work. So I
it
do.
does.
So it's not, on one level, as a rebel, just like you, I celebrate it because it means you've made a difference. But on another level, it is very damaging.
It is. You're right. Well, it does. It intimidates people who aren't as pugnacious as you both and myself, right? But I still see that people. It has reached such a point of critical mass, especially after how right we were on the issues you mentioned of school closures and the masking. Like now the truth is fashionable. So we do have patience. I mean, there's still work to be done. I don't think that there has been accountability that we would probably like. But now in conversation, you can't unsee the truth of the harms that were done. And I do show grace because, Natalya, I know there are people who were all in on those policies and who maybe are all in on these policies now too. And it has to feel pretty awful to know that you were so egregiously wrong and complicit in those harms, right? So I know that it's going to be hard for people to step forward and say, oopsie poopsie. It's just not going to happen. Like, I'm not waiting for the troll who has been so horrible to come knock on my door and be like, I'm really sorry I said all those terrible things. Turns out you were right. Like, I'm not here for that. We're never going to hear that. And we're not going to hear it from the elected politicians or from SPLC or anybody else. But I do see the average person wants to be on the right side of this because we've totaled up and tallied so many harms that you can't unsee it anymore.
I'm not sure I see that. I want to believe you.
Well, I'm in a deep blue state. I'm in a deep blue state. We should have been canceled by now. I mean, honest to goodness, like I shouldn't even have this like platform right now with all of you. We should have been canceled. But pugnacious, strong people are what have kept it afloat, along with small donors that are like, thank you, keep going. But it's been a hustle, and it has been hard. I'm not going to say that it has been easy or fun the whole time, but that's why I said pugnacious souls like you and some others across the country, like we're going to keep going. But the average person's starting to talk more. I am seeing it. We need more. And your tool and resource is a really tangible way for people to say, hey, have you seen this? Right? Like, I'm going to share this with you. Let's talk about it.
And I hope that parents realize that it's important to talk to other parents one-on-one. Generally, people don't, ostracize each other. It tends to be a more nuanced, sorry for the truck, this is New York City. It tends to be a more nuanced, rich conversation. I have to say that at the playground, I could talk to parents about virtually anything as long as, it was done in kind of an open way and asking a lot of questions rather than presenting a lot of answers. I think asking people questions is a great way to kind of introduce this conversation too.
Huge. And so Maia, you're a detransitioner, and I'm so glad that more people are, putting themselves out there to talk about that story, because detransitioners are called transphobic. You're called names, right? And you were the ones who were harmed by this ideology, and you've been speaking very bluntly to that. So on this page here, in the part 2 of your toolkit, Natalya, the rise in detransitioners, you mentioned questions. I have shared this before. I shared it at the Partnership Ethical Care panel. I don't think I had a chance to share it at GenSpec, but something I encourage people to ask is, if you're going to have this conversation, you can do it one of two ways. You can say, how dare you would mutilate and sterilize children, or you could pose a question. So the question I suggest is, have you ever heard a detransitioner story? Wow, I learned so much. Because you're not going on the attack. You're genuinely saying, I learned from hearing a story of detransition. And so, Maia, what are some of the top things you have shared as a detransitioner that you think have really awakened people to consider this in a different light?
Well, I think that, just having detransitioners speak out, I think that having multiple detransitioners speak out is starting to show people that it's not as rare as the ideologues say it is. I mean, there are all of these myths that, regret rates are low, like 2%. I mean, this is a very common talking point. And I think it would be important for people who come up against this argument to note that these 2% regret rate statistics are not only like outdated, incredibly outdated, because these 2% regret rate statistics were collected on patients. They were they were all adult patients, by the way. They were mostly middle-aged. They weren't even young adults. They were middle-aged adults. And the way that they tracked detransition was by looking at the sex markers on people's legal documents. And so whether or not they've been changed once or twice. So that's actually how. So it was basically tracking a legal detransition. As far as like, any of the studies that claim low regret rates, I mean, some version of a systematic review looking at all of these studies and, to try to understand, so what actually is the regret rate? And they've determined that all of these studies are extremely methodologically flawed, including one study from the Netherlands that basically just omitted something like 38% of the people who had stopped showing up to the gender clinic. And it's like, well, why are they, why did they stop showing up? Is it because they got their hormones elsewhere? Is it because they regretted it? Is it like what's going on? So if you look into these studies, they're also, most of them are more pursuant to this older cohort of people. And it was also a far smaller number of patients, whereas these days we have an entirely unprecedented rise, 4,000% increase within teenage girls within the last decade or so, requesting, services for gender dysphoria. So we have this female teenage cohort that we didn't have previously. And now it's like an increasingly growing cohort. And so like the regret rates are truly unknown. I mean, there are some emerging studies that would say that it could be as high as 30%, although there really is no way of knowing because detransitioners don't want to go back to the doctors that harmed them. So I think it's important for people to, maybe have some arguments in their back pocket in order to understand how to argue against some of these, some of these points about, for example, detransition being rare.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm just kind of gradually going through some of the slides, Natalya, of the Gender Toolkit. So if you want me to pause or go to any particular section to delve further in, we can. But real quickly, I want to add to what you said, Maya, about the care of detransitioners. There are a lot of people working very hard to advance policy at the state level to ensure that detransitioners are able to get proper health care for the healthcare journey that they're going to be on to try and resolve or heal from the harms that they endured. So I know that Texas is one of them. There are other states that are trying to offer some more help to detransitioners because I know that this is an unprecedented journey for a lot of people. They can't find doctors who will even help them. So it's a struggle right now, but I know there are people working very hard to advance policy. So God bless those warriors that are doing that because it's going to be very much needed. There are going to be more, as you say, because of this wave, this cohort, more patients that are going to have medicalized, that are going to need help recovering from that journey. Natalya, did you want me to focus on some more of these pages?
Well, yes. I mean, at the beginning, there are different, I think Maya will probably agree with this. There are different ways to address the topic of gender ideology at different ages. And I have this goal at some point of creating a toolkit that parents can share with children of varying ages, like 5 to 9 and 9 to 13 or 14. But I think the important theme, I think that came up when we were at Gen Spec last week was the theme of inoculation. For the younger children in particular, but of course at any age, because it's never a lost cause. I think it's important to introduce the graphics and the words and the images and just the concepts to children at a very young age. Yes. I'm not a psychologist, but I would personally, I introduced it in my household when my younger daughter was 6, because I thought that the most important thing that could happen was I can show her these images. Sorry, New York City apartment. It never ends. I could show, you know, you want to introduce these things at home so that you can help them contextualize all this, right? So that these myths and these theories are presented exactly as that. Because if the first person who introduces your child to these images and to these theories is like a diehard believer activist, then I think you're really in trouble, right? I mean, that's
Yes.
a first mind.
Yes, and Maya did a great job of talking about this in episode 11, where she gave the advice to parents, you know, as she herself, somebody who struggled with gender confusion. Maya, you assert that parents have to talk to their children much earlier than probably new parents of young children would expect. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to parents? Because I can try and picture myself as a new parent with a young, you know, preschooler or entering kindergarten, thinking, oh, well, I want to protect them and have them keep their childhood and everything is rainbows and butterflies. But Natalya, you're shaking your head. We know that they can find a vulnerable population such as young kids and have cartoons and cute illustrated books, or in Illinois, comprehensive education curricula that will try and normalize that confusion among a very vulnerable group of young children. So Maya, can you talk a bit about that advice that you give to parents as now a detransitioner sounding this alarm?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that parents of very young children, and by young, I mean, let's say, under the age of 10. I think it's incumbent upon parents of that age to familiarize themselves a little bit with the literature on sex constancy, which is a developmental milestone that children typically, finish developing around the age of 6 or 7, which is the understanding that biological sex is immutable. So if you take a 3-year-old and you show him a picture of a boy, and then you show him a picture of the same boy wearing a dress, that 3-year-old will think that the boy became a girl, because the 3-year-old, understands that there are these types of people called boys and these other types of people called girls, and that they are kind of differentiated based on their outward appearance, based on pretty rigid stereotypes, because that's sort of how 3 and 4 and sometimes 5-year-olds think. However, the notion of understanding that biological sex is determined by one's body parts and that it's immutable, and if you're born a boy, you'll grow up to be a man, or if you're born a girl, you'll grow up to be a woman. This is a developmental milestone that is incredibly important for kids to reach. And they usually reach it, if you have like a typically developing child, they'll usually reach it at around the age of 6 or 7. And there's a lot of literature about how this process develops, from 2 until it finishes. So I think it's important for parents to understand that, because what these schools are doing when they're trying to, inject these beliefs into the minds of young children is that they're actually like subverting the natural cognitive development of children. So when we think about like the age of 6 or 7 as being a really important age as far as child development goes, this is because at those ages, kids start to develop more complex reasoning skills. And so they have the cognitive acuity to understand that, just because a boy is playing dress up, he didn't actually magically transform into a girl. It's really like a highlight of those developmental, milestones. And so when a kid doesn't reach that by sort of 6 or 7, or if you have a kid with developmental delays, it could be a couple years later, but parents these days have absolutely no way of knowing why their kid is not meeting that particular developmental milestone. And so in previous years, parents could have thought, oh, maybe my kid has a developmental delay that we should get them screened for. But these days, parents don't really have any way of knowing, why their 8 or 9-year-old thinks that they can magically change sex, because that is developmentally abnormal. And so like parents could either come to the conclusion that, oh, maybe my kid has a developmental delay that we need to screen for, or I would argue that you need to add another sort of kind of alert to your mind, which is that it's highly possible that your kids like cognitive development of their reasoning skills is being actively interfered with and subverted by teachers. And so that's like the reason why it's so important for these ideologues to get to the kids young. It's because they haven't reached that cognitive milestone of sex constancy. And so it's good for parents to familiarize themselves with the literature around sex constancy. And also it's good for parents. I mean, in the last episode, I've discussed some children's books that I've been working on, which are aimed at, we have some books for little kids, and then we have some books for teens and young adults to sort of inoculate them against the messages of gender ideology. Messages that basically say, look, girls and boys can wear and do a variety of different things, and that doesn't magically transform you into the opposite sex. And I think that's a far more healthy message to be giving our kids than if you are a non-conforming child. That means that, you were born wrong. Like if you don't adhere to 1950s stereotypes, that means that you're in the wrong body, and that we need to, correct your body with a bunch of dangerous and experimental medical procedures.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Go ahead. Do you have something to add, Natalya?
Well, I'm just thinking about, look, if your grandmother, would think that something was a good idea, generally, old tested theories, are old adages, old, classical wisdom is important to instill in your children. Like, I think it's important to teach things in context. I think it's important to bring the elderly into our children's lives, to give them perspective. We live in these very disjointed, isolated, homes. Like personally, like we live in Manhattan. My mother-in-law is in England. My parents, are in another borough. Generally, the kids are growing up with you, the parent, and like the outside world, the community, the school. And I think that in this current, in our society, the school becomes, everything, right? The teacher is like the role model, like the hero, and they follow everything the teacher says. Like that's their role model. And so I think that, traditionally, like over the past like 20, 30 years, I guess more recently rather, we've kind of abdicated that responsibility and been kind of like, oh, it's fine, like they're in the community, they're in the school. But I think now we need to kind of pull that back and bring that responsibility back into the home and assert our, authority with our children. Yes. Authoritative parenting is what works. It's not authoritarian. Yes. It's authoritative, right? So you show them, you teach them what's right. You give them rules. Kids do well in a structured environment. You have to introduce these concepts and contextualize it for them, and take back that responsibility, take back that agency as a parent. I mean, there's been a real concerted effort by the teachers unions, by our Department of Education, to say teachers know what's best for our children. Well, no, actually, there are children, and I know you know this, but we know what's best for them, and we need to make sure that our children remember that. And also, I think, this whole concept of teaching kids to keep secrets from parents, or having administrators or teachers keep secrets from parents, that is absolutely unacceptable. There are laws that exist to protect children who have, violent domestic situations. Those laws should be leaned on. We don't need to be creating new bureaucratic rules to again, like draw more lines between children and their parents. Parents and children are sacrosanct. And that's what we need to be focused on.
100%. You guys both touch on a very poignant part of the advocacy work that I think we're all doing, which is to really rally the parents. They cannot put all the eggs in the basket of whoever they are entrusting to teach their children. And I don't care if it's a school or a church, temple, synagogue, or a camp. You have to be hyper vigilant in this age of parenting, unlike anything we have seen before. And I'm not speaking to helicopter parenting or limiting your children's independence, but the vigilance that is required now because of all of these compromised sectors and this, what I would call woke agenda, infiltrating literally every part of our culture and all these institutions. Parents have to be more vigilant than ever. But I'm glad you talk about the other generations of your family that we need to get back to. And Maya, you talked about this in the last episode, and I've been talking to a lot of people about this, which is our children are in a time where the information moves very quickly. Life moves very fast. Childhood and the age of childhood is shrinking. So how do you steady yourself? And I'm sure you talk to adults even in this time who feel unsettled by what's happening in culture or in politics or in society, just in the world at large. Everyone is trying to steady themselves. And your children, as a vulnerable population, will find something to steady them. And it may be in conflict with what you, the parents and family, would want them to use as an anchor. So Maya, you talked about in the last episode to really talk to your children. And I think, again, Natalya, from a young age, to study them in the story of their family heritage, right? You are an immigrant, Natalya. So you have that connection to the grit and tenacity and the sacrifice and the joy of coming to America and all of the things that you benefited from, the values that were incorporated into that story, to talk to your children about that and anchor them. Do not let activism or the cultural climate of today be what anchors them. So Maya, you talked a lot about that. Can you speak to, a bit about now as a young 25-year-old who is now of this age of enlightened wisdom, I suppose, as your prefrontal cortex is now mature. As a young person, what do you say about really incorporating that family aspect to children in this time?
Yeah, so I would say that, well, I hope that my prefrontal cortex is mature, although I'm not totally sure about that. The history of some developmental glitches I've had, I think I'll give it a couple more years. But so maybe take my advice with a grain of sand. I don't know. But so as far as like studying kids, I think that, family time is incredibly, incredibly important. And, I think that, well, I guess I have a lot of thoughts about this. Like a lot of times when we're talking about a kid who's already started identifying as trans, there are usually a lot of things going on. And I've heard a lot of parents say, oh my God, like the trans cult ate my child. And it's like, well, on one hand, that's true, but we need to sort of, in order to get a better understanding of what's actually going on with a kid, like we can't just look to the cult. We have to look to the factors of like what made them vulnerable to getting sucked into a cult in the first place. And often, because if we just look at it as this horrible cult that is eating children alive, that doesn't give us anything to work with, really. What we do know about these kids is that, a lot of them have some kind of comorbidities. But some of them, like for me, I was actually like a very mentally healthy child at the time that I got into this. I mean, I was just gay and kind of confused about it, and had a lot of like autistic traits. But, I think that you have a patient population that has a lot of complex needs, but some of them, and some of these needs can actually be solved or at least remedied by parents understanding the developmental phase that their children are in and being able to maximize family time in order to keep in mind the developmental stage your child is in, and not trying to, rush it along prematurely or to stunt it. And what I mean by this is that when you see a lot of teenagers getting into, identity exploration, what's going on at that time for teenagers and for young adults as well is discussed really well in the Gender A Wider Lens podcast hosted by Sasha Ayad and Stella O'Malley, who are psychologists that work with these, teens and young adults. And they talk a lot about the process of individuation, where teenagers and young adults try to basically break away from their parents and to develop their own sense of self in preparation for becoming independent adults. And this is a time of a lot of identity exploration. Now, identity exploration, in previous generations, it didn't have this high medical burden associated with it. Like there weren't, doctors and like the shills for doctors hanging around every corner waiting to recruit some vulnerable kid who's in the midst of an identity crisis and to permanently medicalize them. And so I think that when parents, I think a lot of parents find the phase of adolescence to be a pretty insufferable one because teenagers are difficult. I mean, I remember myself.
It's like nailing Jello to a tree. Have you heard that expression? It's nailing Jello to a tree.
No, but it seems quite accurate. I mean, because they're constantly changing. And so the thing to keep in mind with teenagers is that identity exploration is normal. And parents should, give their kids ways to engage in the developmental task of individuation without it, carrying such a high medical burden. Like, I think that what's happening a lot these days is that because kids are spending so much time on the internet and they don't have all of these real life ways to engage in like healthy risk taking, or even sometimes less healthy risk taking. Like in previous generations, teenagers would sneak out, with with alcohol or, or like, smoking or do things like that. That was their big rebellion. Or, they would have like unsafe, intimate encounters with other teenagers. But these days, what we're seeing with this younger generation is actually that they're like less sexually active. They're less socially active. They're less even romantically active. Like these kids who are identifying as trans these days, they haven't even had their first kiss. They haven't even held hands with somebody else. And so they don't know what they're giving up. And it's because they're spending so much time online and all of their friendships have moved online. And they still have that like primal urge to break away from their parents and develop themselves. And so, a lot of families, I think what would benefit them is to understand that your teenager who is trans identified is actually doing something that is very, very normal. But the reason why you're so alarmed and why you're right to be alarmed is because now this type of identity exploration, it isn't just like an odd haircut and, some odd style choices. For some of these kids it is, but the problem is that once you start, like, parents should allow kids to experiment with like clothes and haircuts that the parents would consider to be ugly. Teenagers have been doing that forever. Like that's not in and of itself a cause for concern. What is a cause for concern is when you might have, a school, behind your back affirming this kind of like developmental, sort of phase that's happening as some kind of an innate identity that needs to be stunted and stopped. The idea of medicalizing the trans identity is basically taking this young person's identity exploration and affixing it, enshrining it within a particular moment. So you're enshrining the most distressed time of a person's life within their body forever. And so it's dangerous.
Yes, it is dangerous. And I come back to the analogy of when I was growing up in the 90s. The rebels gravitated often towards the goth culture. Which was a fashion, sort of rebellion. It was pretty obvious. There were optics. You could say somebody was goth. They tended to be pretty rebellious. But at the time, there weren't teachers who were goth. Or if they were, they maybe just got into goth character when they went to like a punk rock show after school. But there wasn't a secret goth club. And there wasn't Lurie Children's Hospital talking about goth and do this goth and that goth, and we won't tell your parents you're goth. So the culture of that time was easier almost for parents. I'm not saying that they didn't have their struggles with their kids. Rebellion in any form is going to be tricky. But for the most part, there were shared values, and the institution of education was not getting involved in the goth culture. But now it's not goth culture. It is a gender culture. It is I don't even know what you would want to call it. It's just, it's a confusion and a contagion that is affecting young, vulnerable children, to your point, who are naturally exploring their identities. There could be some rebellion, but they are restricted now. The culture of these kids that they're growing up in, it is very restrictive. And so if they're going to rebel and then they have people telling them, well, hey, you can be in this secret club on sex and sexuality and we won't tell your parents, that could be very seductive. If you're seeking and hungry for, as you say, this sort of independence and then this rebellion, it could be very seductive. So you're absolutely right about that. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're fine. I just also wanted to give some sort of practical tools. So I think that, American parents in this day and age are often very nervous to let their kids out of their sight. Like, I think there are a lot of things going on. I think that COVID and all these lockdowns have sort of dutifully trained us, scare trained us into staying at home. And it's dangerous for those kids who were growing up in that era, whose brains were being formed in that era, because for key developmental years, they were totally stuck inside and they were scared to go outside. They were made to feel scared to go outside and to interact with other people. And so I think that, parents right now have a lot that they have to deal with in addition to the normal tasks of raising kids. And one, get your kids outside to do things. Like if you have kids who are like preteens or who are young, I think that, I'm 25 and I don't have kids. So it's not as if I hold some magical answer, but I think that it's important for parents to, figure out sort of to do a couple things. One of them is to figure out what their kids are interested in and to enter their kids' worlds, because that's really important, especially if you have, it's important in general, but especially if you have a kid like me who is who hyper fixated jumping from one rare brain tumor to the next. you know, it's important if you have a kid with these really niche interests who could potentially be made to feel as if they are just such an outcast, to like, especially if you have a really weird or kind of quirky type of kid, it's really important that you as the parent keep in mind that that's the type of kid who's particularly vulnerable, and to kind of, you know, help entertain their intellectual interests, but also, and this is really crucial, especially for American parents, to, while you are, you know, helping support your child's intellectual interests or pursuits, or maybe it's a sport or something like that, it's also important for kids to know that they're not the center of the universe. Like, there's been this shift within American parenting, which basically, you know, in the 50s went from children are to be seen and not to be heard, to in the 80s, like, I don't want to see you or hear you, go play and come back when reminds us that we have kids that we need to watch, you know. So, and then, you know, around the time that I was coming of age and growing up, there was this shift towards helicopter parenting, and, you know, towards, especially within the middle class, just enrolling your kids in as many possible extracurriculars, because there's this idea that, you know, the job market is so incredibly competitive that we need to just, you know, give our kids all of these kind of extracurricular and academic skills. And while that's important, I think a lot of what ended up being missed is that the kids, when every second of their lives is pre-planned and they don't have to fend off boredom for themselves, because when they have free time, they have an internet connected device. You know, what's ended up happening is that kids don't know, they're not learning how to regulate their own emotions, and they're not learning how to regulate their own boredom. They're not using their imagination as much. And I mean, I think that it's important, and they're also not learning skills like, you know, how to do the dishes or how to wash their own laundry, because they're so busy with all these extracurriculars that the parents just think, well, it's much more important for us to invest in our child's developing mind and kind of make them into a genius. But it's like, okay, then you have a genius who's 20 and doesn't know how to fold clothes. Like, so it's really important, I think, you know, as our lives are becoming so much more fast paced, for families to have time together where it does not revolve around watching TV. It does not revolve around screens. Like, there should be time every week, you know, if not every day, but I understand that with, you know, working schedule, that's impossible, but at least on weekends, there should be times that parents set aside with their kids where one phone is brought on the trip for navigation purposes and everybody else's devices are gone. And you go camping, you can do, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't have to be an activity that costs any kind of money. The important thing is for parents and kids to be doing something that everybody at least somewhat enjoys. It doesn't have to be everybody's favorite activity, but it has to be at least somewhat enjoyable for every member of the family, so that people can connect without screens and to learn those skills that people naturally developed, you know, because they didn't have these supercomputers in their pockets, you know, dictating to them what to do whenever they have a singular moment of distress.
Well, certainly, I mean, just pulling it back to every day, I actually think that for people who aren't working, you know, crazy jobs outside of the home, dinner is a really special and important time that they can share with their families around the dinner table. And it's extremely protective. It's great to eat together. Hopefully you're making healthier food than you would be ordering in or, you know, going out, but also just the conversation, like the quotidian conversation that happens at the dinner table where people finally, yes, you know, decompress. And it's like a breath, you know, or I mean, another time that I find that's very, very helpful is a walk to school. I mean, we're fortunate. We're in New York City, so we do walk most places. And I feel like the best conversations with my kids are usually on walks while we're like, you know, heading in another direction and not really focused, not stressed about like getting big information out there. I imagine that can also happen in a car, like in the drive on the way to school or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I think those are important things. I mean, two other things that I think are important and extremely protective. One is team sports. During the course of filming our documentary on school closures, which will be out later this fall, we spent a lot of time talking to teenage athletes and their coaches. And it was clear that that's an incredible relationship that really can last the test of time. And those coaches usually are very focused on health and sports and academics. You need to achieve certain grades in order to compete on those teams. So there's a lot of protective factors that go around team sports, also the relationships that you build with the other athletes. And then the other one, one that I sort of grew up with, but didn't really ascribe to, is religion. We all need something magical in this world. It can't just be about, evidence and research and science. We need to feel like we're part of something bigger. And I don't know that that necessarily means a belief in God, but maybe a certain kind of collectivism, believing in, a certain spirituality or being part of something. I think, if you're not part of something, a religion or, some sort of faith, then I think that child is left vulnerable to a mythology or an ideology coming to prey upon them.
Sure. Something will fill that void. You're absolutely right. And this is all great advice. And it reminds me of what January Littlejohn said in a previous episode of Protect the Kids. January, has been dealing with a federal lawsuit because her child was secretly socially transitioned at school. And January is sounding the alarm that we have a parenting crisis right now. So that's why I say, we can blame a lot of the woke agenda, the cabals, the money behind all of this. But ultimately, we as the parents have to take the ultimate control and do right with the finite amount of time we have to raise a generation of children that does deserve to be resilient and that does deserve to see resilience modeled for them and to be connected and anchored to the right things and not the wrong things. So I want to just show really quickly the blog post where we had Maia, let me see if I'm doing this here, where we had Maia speak. And Maia, you had mentioned the books that are available. And one of them was inspired by your journey. So we have the link to that. I would encourage parents to find every resource possible. There are so many resources. And so this was just a really good conversation. Episode 11, I encourage people to listen to it and to share it and to learn more about Maia's story. And ask your friends, have you heard a detransitioner story? Wow, I learned a lot, and you will. So I'm really grateful, Maia, that you have been speaking to what your experience has been and that you're channeling it into a resource such as a children's book that parents can get. And then, of course, we have your tool here, Natalya. So I've been showing the ticker. Have you been able to see that? The ticker that I've had on there, showing that it is at this website. Here, let me pull it up. Here we go. I swear my thing is just not working today. But here, I'll do the ticker. GenderToolkit.com. Let me get that up before we finish closing out. Did you have anything you want to plug about your documentary, Natalya?
Well, we worked on it for over 2 years, interviewed about 60 different scientists, parents, lots of children all around the country. And it's a documentary in several parts. Filmmaking is very extensively expensive and also just takes so long. But episode 1 should be out this fall. And it's about school closures. We really were very discreet, didn't really get into the masks and vaccines. That's part of episode 2, but it's about the rise of the parent movement. So I'll share it with you when it's out.
Very good. Well, I'm just so grateful that you have been working on all of these wonderful resources and that the two of you are really sounding the alarm for parents and giving really, really great advice. And so here we have the Gender Toolkit. Find it at gendertoolkit.com and stay tuned to Restore Childhood for your documentary that's going to be coming up. So this conversation is going to be available on all the social media platforms, and also the slides that I've shown today will have all the links so that you can follow Natalya, you can follow Maia, and you can get all the resources that have been covered here today. So I hope that all of you found it helpful. We all as parents need every bit of advice and help that we can get. None of us have all the answers, but in this time, there are ways to navigate this very important and sensitive topic. And so the tools we discussed today, share them with your friends, share them with your family, because Natalya, I know you and I in our communities sometimes feel overwhelmed, and there are good days and bad days, but I truly believe, and this was discussed at the GenSpect event, the more we talk to one another, that can literally save somebody from medicalization and harm of this agenda. You literally can save a child from it. This isn't just advocacy or policy. This is literally saving a child. And any parent who has the best of resources can make a huge difference. And even a counselor and a teacher that may be exploring this issue and saying, wow, maybe I did have it wrong. I see this differently now. So share all of this and tell all of your friends, all of your family, and get back to the basics of family and parenting. Get back to the dinner table, talk to your children, and don't be afraid to navigate this with them from a very, very young age. So thank you, Natalya, and thank you, Maya. Thank you, everybody who tuned in today for this about an hour 10 conversation, and look forward to seeing what both of you do in the future to keep sounding the alarm and to help others. So thank you so much, you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It's a great conversation.
Thank you. Well, take care and be well, and we'll talk to all of you soon. Thank you. Bye.